What just happened is I got one of those questions right, so
You should have studied. I apologize.
I was right behind Bro Jay in that. All right, welcome everybody. It's good to see you all here. I'm excited to talk about just what we got tonight. So tonight we're talking about just resolving conflict, repairing relationships, all goes into that. We just thought this was a really awesome topic to talk about. It's something that's really important to us as we seek to build community and as we seek to build deep relationships with one another. So I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to give a little bit of background. I'm going to give some practicals. And then, yeah, we'll break up into small groups like we've been doing. So just to start off, as I'm assuming most of you know, like the Trinity, God is actually a communion of persons, and we're created in His image and likeness. We're actually called to be in communion with one another. He is our source. He is our meaning. He's the destiny of our life, and we're called to imitate that. Not to live alone, which in this day and age, right now, where we all are with the pandemic, we may feel really isolated, and we may not feel this truth as much. But we're actually called to be together. So Christ, when He came, actually sought to restore our relationship with God and with each other. And so we get to imitate that as we pursue relationships with one another. And God, one of Jesus' last prayers before the Passion was actually that we would be one, that we would be united as He and the Father are one. So this is actually really at the heart of the Father's plan for us, is that we would be united with one another. Just to lay it out there, conflict is a normal thing in relationships. It's a normal thing that we experience, like even in our Christian life, like we're just going to experience conflict. Being just what we do. Best friends, even the best of families, will experience conflict. And what characterizes us as true disciples is not whether or not we experience conflict, but it's actually how do we handle conflict and how do we handle relational difficulties. So Christian relationships involves peace. So Christ, when He called, He actually calls us to live in unity with one another. If you want to get a great scripture on Christ's call to live in unity with one another, I just encourage you to read Ephesians chapter 4. It goes through a lot of stuff. There'll be some things that I hit on right now, but that's just a good passage to pray and reflect on the Lord's call for us to live in unity with our brothers and sisters. So in that chapter, Paul actually exhorts us to earnestly desire and to strive for unity and peace with one another. So like in a negative way, peace, what is peace? It's the absence of conflict. That's like one way you could look at peace. But positively, peace is good relationships. When we have good relationships, when we have strong relationships, we'll experience peace in them. So peace is conducting ourselves in relationships according to God's design. So just going to put a disclaimer out there. Dealing with conflict and difficulties in relationships looks different when we're relating to other Christians than when we're relating to people that are not Christian. Because there's a certain basis that we can come at it. When we're Christian together, we have a certain same worldview of being brothers and sisters in Christ that just allows us to actually approach conflict and conflict resolution and relationships from the same standpoint. So we're kind of coming at this from how do you resolve conflict when both of you are Christian, both of you are striving for virtue, both of you are striving for holiness. A lot of the same stuff applies in our other relationships, but primarily this like mode that we're talking about is how do we actually engage with one another as Christian brothers and sisters. Great. So just a couple things Ephesians has to say. One of the things, this is in night prayer, if you ever do night prayer, I forget what day it is, the bros can probably tell you. But one of the readings, it talks about our desire, like be angry, but do not sin. Do not go to bed on your anger. And part of resolving conflict is we need to actually approach this quickly. We shouldn't let it fester. We shouldn't let it sit. We shouldn't just be like, oh, you did this thing that hurt me, or we're having this conflict. I'm just going to kind of let it simmer, let it sit, and just like let everything fester inside me. But St. Paul actually encouraged us, no, like do not let the sun go down on your anger. So this, we should be very quick to resolve conflict, to resolve relational difficulties. And another approach just as Christians is we really need to be approaching the person who we have the conflict with. It's not helpful for us to approach someone else on the side and be like, hey, this person just did this to me and I'm really mad, I'm really upset. Like, but actually to approach the person and be like, hey, I'll get into like, how do you actually do that? But we need to be bold and actually approach the person. There's obviously times when you're like, I actually don't know how to approach this person. I don't know how to broach this topic. And that would be an opportunity to talk to someone who's a little older than you, who's been through it, one of the staff, or just an older brother or sister, and like get their advice on it. But it's not the sort of, oh, I'm just going to rant out to you all the reasons why this person is annoying me right now. But actually it's seeking advice and seeking how can you resolve that well. So that's just part of our call as Christians, is to resolve conflict well, and to not kind of spread the conflict where it does not need to be. Great. So there's kind of two approaches to resolving conflict. So there's resolving conflict when it has us that is actually hurt the person, and then there's resolving conflict when it is us who have been hurt. And they actually need to be handled in two pretty distinct ways. There's some similarity in them, but there is a difference in approaching conflict from I'm the one that is wrong or in the wrong, or I'm actually approaching someone who has hurt me. So just a important thing before we get into this is whenever we're seeking to resolve conflict, whenever we're seeking to repair relationships, we need to have in mind the end goal. Like the end goal is unity. The end goal is like a resolution. It's not, oh, I'm right and we're going to come to this like knowledge that I was right. But it's actually, no, it's a unity. It's coming before the person and being reunited. Because conflict, what conflict does is actually it divides us. It causes us to be separated. And the Lord's call is for us to be united. The Lord's call is for us to be in union, to be in communion with one another. And so that should be our mindset when we're coming into this. Our mindset should be not, oh, I'm going to prove why what I did was fine or why what you did hurt me, but actually no, like I want this relationship to be repaired so that we can be in union with one another. So that's just like our mindset. So before I kind of move on, I want you guys to imagine, just take like 30 seconds to think of a time when you have hurt someone in some way. Maybe you said something that you shouldn't have said, or you did something that you shouldn't have done, and you like actually know that it hurt another person. So just take like 30 seconds to think about it, because then we're going to get into how can we approach that. All right. So I'm sure we all have thoughts. We all have people that we can think of that maybe we've hurt or we said something to. As we're going through this, I want you to be thinking like, okay, did you actually approach that relationship to resolve the conflict? Or did you just kind of say, time will take care of it. I can just kind of let it go and eventually things will get back to normal. And so just like as we're thinking about this, I want us to be thinking about this when we're looking at either past hurts or future hurts or whatever the conflict is, like it's really our responsibility to be upfront and to actually go forward in this conflict resolution. And particularly when we're the ones that have actually hurt someone, like we need to be the ones that first seek reconciliation. And so there's basically a very quick four phrase model to approach someone when you are asking them for forgiveness and when you're seeking reconciliation. So the first thing is just saying, I'm sorry. Just recognizing, hey, I did something wrong and I'm sorry. It's not just a magic word that makes everything go away, but it is something that it expresses the contrition, like I'm sad that this happened and I wish it hadn't. That's what saying I'm sorry means. So it's I'm sorry, and then the next phrase is it was wrong. So it's just recognizing, hey, what I did, how I hurt you was wrong. Like it was wrong for me to do that. So just acknowledging that fact. It's just a really helpful, instead of saying like, oh, I'm sorry, but what I did really wasn't wrong. But no, it's actually just saying, no, I'm sorry. What I did hurt you and that was wrong. Then the next part is I won't, or I will try not to do it again. So it's this resolution of, hey, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong, and I will not do it again. So it's telling the person like, hey, to the best of my ability, I know what I did was wrong, and I'm going to try not to do that again. And then the last one, which is probably the most important, is just saying the words, will you please forgive me? And asking them for forgiveness. So if you notice, this is actually very similar to the act of contrition. Like when we go before the Lord, like this is what we say. We say, basically, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong. I won't do it again, or I resolve not to do this again. Will you forgive me? And so the same way that we approach God in seeking forgiveness is the same way that we actually approach one another. All right, so that's like an approach of, hey, I hurt you. This is me coming to you, seeking reconciliation. Now, how do we approach someone when they've hurt us? I don't know about you, but this is actually way harder for me, like to do than when I've hurt someone. I feel like when I've hurt someone and I know that I've hurt someone, it's really easy to just go up to them and be like, hey, I'm sorry. This was wrong for me to do that. Will you forgive me? But actually approaching someone who has hurt us, like, can be a lot more challenging and a lot more difficult. But it's probably more important. It's more important for us to be able to handle conflict when it's something that actually has impacted us in a way that has hurt us or has challenged us in some way. So before I get into too much of how do you do this, I want to explain kind of a spectrum of being hurt. So on one end of the spectrum, there is just being annoyed, like someone's doing something that you're just like, I find that really annoying. And then it moves up to disagreement, like, hey, I disagree with you, whether that's like an impersonal thing of just like, bro, Austin, the Packers suck. Or
what's the next level above annoyed, because I am it.
Mm-hmm. Or just like, hey, I like Lord of the Rings more than I like Star Trek or whatever. It's like this level of disagreement where it's not really a big deal, but you disagree strongly with someone. Then there's offended. So that's kind of the next level where, okay, maybe someone said something and you were like, oh, that actually like hit wrong, or it just like hurt in some way. Then there's hurt, like actually being hurt, where it's like a deeper wound. It was maybe intentional. And then the last one is like a broken trust. So when someone actually in some way breaks our trust, maybe shares something that they shouldn't have shared, or doesn't follow through in something, or just in some way breaks our trust. So there's this spectrum of being hurt. And these first two, the annoyed and the disagreed part, you don't really need to do conflict resolution about these things. You don't need to go approach your brother or your sister and be like, hey, bro, Austin, the way that you love the Packers just really annoys me, and we really need to resolve this right now, because that's what we got to do. No, like, these are things that we're actually, as Christians, we're called to what's called forbearance. And forbearance isn't ignoring it. It's not saying, oh, that just doesn't happen, or kind of wishing it would go away. But it's a willingness to overlook it and to carry the burden of discomfort and to not hold it against a person. So I think of examples in my own life. I will not name names. I will try not to name names, but maybe someone, just like happens to chew really loudly at dinner. And you're like, well, that's really annoying. But it's not really a conflict. It's not really a like, oh, I need to like go up to this person and be like, hey, let's like resolve this. But it's actually something I can choose, like, hey, yeah, this is something annoying, like, but it's not something wrong. It's not something sinful. It's not something that they're doing that is bad. It's just a quirk that they have. And I actually can choose to just, all right, that's something that they do. I'm going to overlook it for the sake of the unity of our friendship and the sake of the unity of whatever community that we're living in. So that's kind of with annoy and disagree. For the most part, you don't really need to worry so much about actually engaging the person and doing conflict resolution. It's when we start to get to offended and hurt and broken trust that we definitely need to be stepping into this. So with offended, sometimes you can just forbear. You can just be like, hey, they just said something they weren't thinking. Maybe I got offended, but I can actually like let that go. But maybe it was something like, hey, they said something, they weren't thinking about it, and it actually really hurt. Or it actually, like, the way they said it, even if it was unintentional, like really hurt me. So I actually need to go up to this person and resolve this conflict. And then, yeah, absolutely, if someone's intentionally hurt you or broken your trust, like that absolutely requires some sort of reconciliation conversation to happen. So next, we're just going to get into some tangible steps of how do you do this? How do you approach someone when you want to reconcile a relationship? So first, it's again keeping in mind that like the goal of this is unity. The goal of this is communion. The goal of this is reconciling relationship. So a very quick thing to do so that you don't kind of come off as like, all right, I'm telling you everything you just did wrong. It's just to say, hey, I really value our friendship. So it's affirming the relationship. It's saying like, hey, I really value our friendship. And then just go right into it, address the problem. And an important part in this is to address the problem, not address the person as the problem, because it's actually the person's behavior that we want to address. Like, it's when someone has actually done something, that's what we want to address. So it'd be saying something like, hey, when you did such and such, I felt this, or I experienced this, or this happened to me. So it's saying like, hey, when you did this action, behavior, whatever it was, this is what it did to me. So it's addressing the problem, just getting it out there. And then actually articulating what you want to see changed. So it's being like, hey, when you did that, or when you said this, I felt hurt, I felt isolated, I felt attacked, whatever it was, or I felt like you broke my trust. I would appreciate if you did not do XYZ again. Or like, in the future, please don't do this. Because oftentimes, I know from my own life, oftentimes I can get hurt by someone saying something unintentional. They didn't know. Maybe I have a certain wound in my life that they just didn't know. Like, and they were just saying, they were making a joke, but it actually like really hurt. And so I would just say, hey, when you made that joke, it hurt me in this way. I would appreciate if you didn't make those kinds of jokes again. Um, and then the last step is to accept forgiveness. So sometimes when we approach when we approach a conversation dealing with reconciliation, depending on where the other person is at, they may not even be ready to accept that they did anything wrong. And yet we're still called to offer forgiveness. So to just say, hey, I forgive you, to end it there, to say, I forgive you for this. Because as Christians, we should be quick to forgive. We pray it all the time when we pray the Our Father, Lord, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So it's our call as Christians to offer forgiveness and to offer it quickly. So again, so the 4 things: affirm the relationship, address the problem, articulate the request, and then accept forgiveness. So that's kind of just how do we do this? Just some closing notes. We should actually be really thankful for relationship difficulties. I don't know if you believe that, but actually when we have conflict and we have hard situations and we can actually address them, that's actually a huge gift. Like some of my best friends have actually come from when I've had to reconcile with someone or confront someone about something in a relationship, and we've actually had to have this hard conversation. I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard conversation to have, and yet being able to work through it, to put unity first, to put this desire for communion and community first, bears a lot of fruit. So just to put that out there, it may seem really scary, and it probably is, and it probably isn't going to go super well the first 100 times that you do this. And it's going to look different every time that you do it, because you're probably working with a different person, unless you happen to have the same fight with the same person 100 times, which I hope not. That would be awful. But it's a huge way for us to grow. It's a huge way for us to grow, not only in our own life, but actually in relationship with one another. And a huge reason why is because it builds our character. It teaches us to be quick to reconcile, to be quick to forgive, teaches us to be quick to ask for forgiveness, to recognize when we have hurt or when we may have unintentionally done something. And that's God's desire. God's desire for us is to grow in character and for us to grow in holiness. And this is just a really practical way that he desires us to do this. And I know often when we think about conflict, when we think about difficulties, we often see it as something outside of us. It can't change, or that it needs to change. It's this thing that's outside of us. But we can't actually control all the external realities of our life. We can't control all of the things that happen to us, but we can actually change how we view it, how we approach it, how do we address it. And so in learning how to do conflict resolution well, and in learning how to address these difficulties in relationship, we actually grow in how we can change our own reality, how we can change how we view things as well. So just the last thing I'll say, how we handle conflict is actually more important than what the resolution is. So how we deal with maintaining a good relationship with someone when there's been hurt is actually more important than whether we got our way, whether we were proved right, whether whatever. It's actually more important that we handle it well, that we can approach this well in our lives. Yeah, and it's a huge gift, it's a huge blessing, and it's a huge tool for us to grow not only in union with ourselves and with one another, but also in unity with God. Because when we're quick to recognize our need for forgiveness, but also our need to seek out reconciliation with others, it translates to actually us recognizing our need for the Lord and our need for reconciliation with Him. And it's so great that we get to talk about this as we're heading into the Triduum, when God did the greatest act ever in order to bring about reconciliation, in order to bring back us who had gone astray, who had chosen death, like, and His desire was for us to be reunited and to be reconciled with the Father. And He desires us to do that with Him, but also in our relationships with one another. Amen.